The morning of August 12, 1943, broke hot and humid over the Philippine jungle. 17 American soldiers of the 32nd Infantry Division stood in a ragged semicircle around the mouth of a cave that their intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marcus Holloway, had discovered 3 days earlier while conducting reconnaissance near the village of San Rafael. The cave entrance was an unremarkable scar in the limestone hillside, partially concealed by thick vines and the twisted roots of ancient banyan trees. Sergeant Daniel Reeves wiped sweat from his forehead and studied the darkness beyond the entrance. At 32, he was the oldest man in the unit and had seen action in North Africa before being transferred to the Pacific Theater. His instincts, honed by months of combat, told him something was wrong about this mission. The cave system supposedly contained a Japanese ammunition depot, according to information extracted from a captured enemy soldier. But the prisoner had seemed almost relieved when he talked about the cave, as if he was glad to be far away from it. "Gear check in 5 minutes," Reeves called out, his voice cutting through the morning birdsong. The men responded with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Private Tommy Chen, a 19-year-old from San Francisco, checked his rifle for the 3rd time. Corporal James McKenzie, a former coal miner from West Virginia, seemed the most at ease with the prospect of underground combat. Private First Class Robert Morrison stood slightly apart from the others, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. Lieutenant Holloway emerged from the command tent, his fresh uniform already showing dark patches of perspiration. He was 24 years old, a Princeton graduate who had received his commission only 8 months earlier. The other officers respected his intelligence but questioned his combat judgment. This mission was his idea, his chance to prove himself. "Listen up," Holloway announced, unfolding a hand-drawn map. "Intelligence suggests this tunnel system extends approximately 200 yards into the hillside. The Japanese have been storing ammunition and possibly medical supplies in the deeper chambers. Our objective is simple: penetrate, assess, and if possible, destroy or capture whatever we find. Radio contact will be maintained with Corporal Peters here at the entrance." Corporal Vincent Peters nodded, already setting up the field radio equipment. He was a stocky man from Louisiana, who had been relegated to communications duty after taking shrapnel in his left leg during a skirmish 2 months prior. Private Eddie Sullivan, the unit's jokester despite the grim circumstances, raised his hand. "Sir, what about the locals? They've been acting strange since we arrived. That old woman yesterday kept making signs at us." Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The village of San Rafael had indeed been unwelcoming. The elderly residents had made warding gestures, and the children had been kept indoors. One old man had spoken to their interpreter using a Tagalog word that roughly translated to, "the place where time sleeps." Holloway dismissed the concern with a wave. "Superstition. These people have been under Japanese occupation. They're frightened of everything." He checked his watch, a silver Bulova that had been his father's. "It's 0847 hours. We move out in 13 minutes. The soldiers completed their preparations in tense silence. Each man carried a rifle, ammunition, canteens, rations, flashlights, and various pieces of specialized equipment. Corporal McKenzie had demolition charges. Private Chen carried extra medical supplies. Sergeant Reeves had a compass, though he wondered how useful it would be underground. At precisely 0900 hours, the 17 men formed up at the cave entrance. The mouth of the cave exhaled a cool breath that smelled of minerals and something else, something organic and old. Lieutenant Holloway took the lead, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Sergeant Reeves followed directly behind him, then the others in a loose single file. The tunnel entrance was wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast, but it narrowed quickly. The walls were smooth limestone, worn by water over countless centuries. Their footsteps echoed strangely, the sounds seeming to travel both forward and backward simultaneously. Private Morrison noted that the echoes didn't quite match the timing of their steps, but he said nothing, not wanting to appear cowardly. They had advanced perhaps 50 yards when Private Chen noticed the first peculiarity. "Sergeant," he whispered, "my watch stopped." Reeves glanced at his own wrist. His watch, a reliable military-issue timepiece that had never failed him, showed 9:03 a.m. The second hand was frozen in place. He tapped the crystal, but nothing happened. "Mine too," said Private Sullivan behind them. A quick check revealed that every watch in the unit had stopped at exactly 9:03 a.m. Lieutenant Holloway tried to maintain composure. Magnetic interference, probably iron deposits in the rock. Continue forward. But it wasn't just the watches. As they penetrated deeper, the men began to notice other anomalies. The beam from Private Morrison's flashlight seemed to bend slightly when aimed at certain sections of the wall. Corporal Mackenzie, who had spent years underground in the coal mines, remarked that the air pressure felt wrong, too consistent, as if they weren't descending at all, despite the obvious downward slope. At approximately 100 yards, though without functioning watches, distance became their only reliable measure. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The ceiling rose to perhaps 15 feet, and the space was roughly circular, about 30 feet in diameter. Lieutenant Holloway called for a halt. Set up a perimeter. Chen, Morrison, check those alcoves on the far side. The two privates moved forward, their flashlight beams revealing that the chamber was not natural. The walls showed tool marks, but they were strange. Too precise, too regular to be made by hand tools. There were no Japanese supplies, no ammunition crates, no evidence of recent occupation. What they did find was disturbing. On the far wall, someone had carved symbols. Private Chen, who had studied anthropology before the war, approached cautiously. The symbols were not Japanese, not any language he recognized. They seemed to shift slightly in the flashlight beam, though that had to be a trick of the eye caused by the uneven surface. "Sir, you should see this," Chen called out. Lieutenant Holloway joined him, running his fingers over the carvings. They were deep, precise, and formed patterns that seemed almost mathematical. Circles within circles, radiating lines, and what might have been numbers or letters in an unknown script. Sergeant Reeves felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Lieutenant, I recommend we abort the mission. There's nothing here, and this place doesn't feel right." "Noted, Sergeant, but we haven't completed our reconnaissance. There's another passage on the far side." Indeed, the chamber had 3 exits, the tunnel they had entered through and 2 others. One led upward at a gentle angle. The other descended more steeply, and from it came a faint sound, a humming or vibration that was felt more than heard. "We split up," Holloway decided. "Reeves, take 8 men and check the upper passage. I'll take the rest and investigate the lower tunnel. We rendezvous here in 30 minutes. Reeves wanted to argue, knew that splitting the group was tactically unsound, but military discipline held. "Yes, sir." The sergeant selected his team: Chen, Sullivan, Morrison, Mackenzie, and 3 others, Privates Anderson, Kowalski, and Garcia. The remaining 8 men, including Lieutenant Holloway, Privates Donovan, Hayes, Fletcher, and Corporals Winston, Baker, Taylor, and Jefferson, prepared to descend. "Radio check before we separate," Holloway ordered. Corporal Winston, who carried a portable radio, tried to raise Peters at the entrance. Static filled the air, thick and soupy, but no response came through. "Try again," Holloway commanded. Winston adjusted the frequency, but the result was the same. Static that seemed to carry patterns, almost like voices speaking a language just beyond comprehension. "We'll re-establish contact when we return to the surface," Holloway decided. "Maintain light discipline and stay alert." The 2 groups separated. Sergeant Reeves led his men up the ascending passage, which quickly narrowed to the point where they had to proceed in single file. The walls here were different. Darker stone, almost glassy in appearance. Private Morrison's flashlight beam reflected off the surface in unexpected ways, creating brief flashes of color like oil on water. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Holloway's group descended into the lower passage. The humming grew stronger, resonating in their bones. The tunnel spiraled downward in a gradual corkscrew, and the walls here bore more of the strange symbols. Private Donovan, a farmer's son from Iowa, noted that the symbols seemed to repeat in sequences of 17. The passage opened into another chamber, this one much larger than the first. The ceiling was lost in darkness beyond the reach of their flashlights. In the center of the chamber stood something that stopped the soldiers in their tracks. It was a structure, or perhaps a machine. Smooth metallic surfaces formed a ring approximately 12 feet in diameter, suspended somehow above the ground without visible supports. The metal was not steel or iron, but something that seemed to absorb light while simultaneously emitting a faint blue-green luminescence. The humming emanated from this object, pulsing in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. "What the hell is that?" Corporal Winston breathed. Lieutenant Holloway approached slowly, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. The surface of the ring was covered in more of the symbols, but these seemed alive, shifting and changing as he watched. He reached out to touch it. "Sir, don't!" Private Fletcher shouted. But Holloway's fingers had already made contact. The humming intensified, rising in pitch. The ring began to rotate slowly, though there was no visible mechanism making it move. Light bloomed within the circle. not reflecting off the chamber walls but seeming to create depth, as if the ring was a window opening onto somewhere else. Above, in the ascending passage, Sergeant Reeves and his men had discovered something equally strange. The tunnel had led them to a small chamber where the walls were lined with what appeared to be containers, dozens of them, made from the same unknown metal as the ring below. Private Chen examined one closely. "Sergeant, these aren't ammunition boxes. I don't think they're storage at all. Look at this. There are seams here, but they're too precise. And this symbol here, it's the same one that was in the main chamber." Mackenzie used his mining experience to study the chamber's construction. This room was carved out recently, maybe within the last year, but the tools used weren't anything I've seen before. The rock is cut, not chipped or blasted. Cut clean, like with a saw. A tremor ran through the floor. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. From below they heard a sound, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to pass through matter rather than simply vibrating through air. "We need to get back to the others," Reeves ordered. The men filed out quickly, moving back down the ascending passage, but when they reached what should have been the main chamber, they found something impossible. The chamber was there, but it was different. The walls were the same, the dimensions identical, but the exits were wrong. There were now 4 passages leading out, not 3. "What the—" Private Sullivan's voice trailed off. "Stay calm," Reeves commanded, though his own heart was racing. "Chen, Anderson, check that passage. The rest of you, defensive positions." Below, Lieutenant Holloway's group was experiencing their own crisis. When Holloway had touched the ring, something had activated. The light within the circle had solidified into a surface that rippled like water but gave off no reflection. The humming had become a sound, not quite musical, not quite mechanical, but something that suggested both. Private Hayes had stumbled backward and knocked into one of the strange symbols on the wall. The symbol had flared with light, and suddenly the entire chamber was illuminated by a sourceless glow. They could now see the ceiling. It was perhaps 40 feet high and covered entirely in the shifting symbols. "We need to leave now," Corporal Baker insisted, his voice tight with fear. But when they turned to retrace their steps, the passage they had descended through was gone. The wall was solid, unbroken, as if the tunnel had never existed. Holloway spun around, his flashlight beam cutting uselessly through the ambient glow. "There has to be another way out. Spread out, search the walls." The men moved to obey, but Private Donovan remained transfixed by the ring. The surface within it was changing, showing images, or were they reflections? He saw landscapes that looked tropical but wrong, trees that grew in spirals, a sky that held 2 suns, and then he saw figures moving, humanoid but elongated, their movements too fluid. "Lieutenant," Donovan called out, "there's something in there." The other men gathered around. Through the ring, they could see what appeared to be another chamber, similar to the one they occupied but inverted somehow, the floor where the ceiling should be, and in that chamber, they saw movement. 17 figures approached the other side of the ring. As they drew closer, recognition dawned with horrifying clarity. The figures were them, the same men, in the same uniforms, looking through the ring with expressions of equal shock and confusion. Private Fletcher reached out instinctively toward his mirror image. Both hands met at the surface of the ring, and at that moment, several things happened simultaneously. The humming ceased abruptly, replaced by absolute silence. The light within the ring flared brilliant white, and every man in both groups, those above in the chamber with Sergeant Reeves and those below with Lieutenant Holloway, felt a sensation of movement without motion, of time stretching thin as wire. Then everything went dark. When consciousness returned, it came slowly and with a profound sense of dislocation. Sergeant Daniel Reeves opened his eyes to absolute darkness and for a moment couldn't remember where he was or even who he was. Then memory flooded back. The cave, the strange symbols, the separated groups. He fumbled for his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam revealed that he was lying on the floor of the main chamber, the one where they had first stopped to examine the carved symbols. Around him, his men were stirring, groaning as they regained awareness. He counted quickly. Chen, Sullivan, Morrison, Mackenzie, Anderson, Kowalski, Garcia, all 8 men from his group. But there were more. Lieutenant Holloway sat up nearby, his uniform covered in limestone dust. Behind him, the rest of his group was scattered across the chamber floor. 17 men total. They were all here, reunited somehow despite being in different passages when whatever had happened occurred. Sound off, Reeves ordered, his sergeant's instincts taking over. One by one, the men called out their names. Everyone was present, apparently uninjured, though several complained of headaches and a sensation they described as feeling hollow. Lieutenant Holloway got to his feet unsteadily. His silver watch, which had stopped at 9:03, now showed 9:14. He tapped it in disbelief. 11 minutes. We were down here 11 minutes total. That can't be right, sir, Corporal Mackenzie protested. We were separated for at least 20 minutes before whatever happened. The men checked their own watches. All of them were running again and all showed times within a minute or two of 9:14 a.m. Reeves pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily for a moment before pointing steadily north, or what should be north, but the reading seemed off by several degrees from what he remembered. What's the last thing anyone remembers? Holloway asked, attempting to impose order on the situation. The responses were fragmented and inconsistent. Some men remembered finding the ring in the lower chamber. Others insisted they had been in the upper passage examining the metal containers when everything went white. Private Morrison claimed he had seen the chamber with 4 exits instead of 3. Private Donovan described touching his reflection through the ring. We were in 2 different places, Reeves said slowly, working it through. We split up, but somehow we all remember parts of both experiences. Shared hallucination, Holloway suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Carbon monoxide, maybe. Some kind of gas in the air. But Chen shook his head. Sir, I've studied psychology. 17 men don't have identical complex hallucinations. And look, he pointed to Private Fletcher's hand. There was a mark there, a faint blue-green luminescence in the pattern of a handprint, exactly where Fletcher had reached through the ring to touch his reflection. Fletcher stared at his hand in horror. It doesn't hurt. I can't feel anything. But I can see it, right? Tell me you can see it. They could all see it. The mark pulsed faintly in rhythm with Fletcher's heartbeat. We need to get out of here, Holloway decided. Now, before anything else happens. No one argued. The men formed up quickly, eager to leave the chamber and its mysteries behind. They moved toward the tunnel they had originally entered through, but after only 30 yards, Corporal Winston stopped abruptly. This isn't right, he said. The passage is too straight. When we came in, there was a bend about here, remember? We had to turn left around a rock outcropping. The men examined the tunnel. Winston was correct. The passage was perfectly straight, extending into darkness without the curve they all remembered navigating. Maybe we're in the wrong tunnel, Private Sullivan suggested. Maybe we should try one of the others. But when they returned to the chamber, they found only 2 exits. The straight passage they had just explored, and another that descended at a steep angle. There was no third passage, no ascending tunnel where Reeves and his men had found the metal containers. Lieutenant Holloway made a decision. The exit has to be this way. We follow the straight passage. Stay together this time, no splitting up. They proceeded in tight formation, flashlights held high. The tunnel continued far longer than it should have. Reeves kept track of the distance by counting steps. They had gone well over 300 yards, more than the entire tunnel system was supposed to extend. Yet there was no end in sight, just smooth limestone walls that seemed increasingly regular, almost manufactured. Private Morrison stopped to catch his breath, leaning against the wall. His hand brushed against one of the carved symbols, and the wall moved. A section of it slid sideways with a whisper of sound, revealing another passage. The men jumped back, weapons ready, though what good rifles would do against walls that moved on their own was questionable. Beyond the new opening, they could see another chamber, this one illuminated by the same sourceless glow they had experienced near the ring. Don't touch anything else, Holloway ordered unnecessarily. Everyone was already keeping their hands to themselves. But Private Chen had noticed something. Sir, look at the symbol Morrison touched. It's the same one that was next to those metal containers in the upper passage. The passage that isn't there anymore. The symbol was indeed distinctive. A circle with 17 radiating lines, each line terminating in a smaller circle. Chen had noticed it repeated throughout the cave system, but here, it seemed to serve as a kind of key or switch. These symbols are controls, Chen said with growing excitement and fear. This whole place, it's not a natural cave system. It's not a Japanese ammunition depot. It's something else, something designed and built. Sergeant Reeves peered into the newly revealed chamber. It was hexagonal, about 20 feet across, and the walls were lined with more of the metal containers. But these were open, their lids tilted back. Inside each container was a shape, roughly human in proportion but elongated, wrapped in a material that looked like fabric but moved slightly as if breathing. "Are those bodies?" Private Garcia whispered. Holloway stepped forward despite every instinct screaming at him to retreat. He approached the nearest container and looked inside. The wrapped figure was perhaps 7 feet tall, thin to the point of appearing skeletal. The wrapping material was translucent enough to reveal that whatever was inside had too many joints in its limbs, fingers that were too long, a skull that was the wrong shape. Not human, Holloway stated flatly, but also not alive, or maybe not dead. I can't tell. Corporal Mackenzie, the practical miner, said what they were all thinking. "We need to leave. Right now. This is way above our pay grade. This is way above the Army's pay grade." They retreated from the hexagonal chamber, but the straight passage still showed no sign of ending. Holloway checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. They had been underground for nearly an hour now, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. "Wait," Private Chen said suddenly. "Everyone freeze." The men stopped. In the silence they could hear it. A sound like breathing, but it came from the walls themselves, from the stone around them. The tunnel was alive, or housed something alive, and they were inside it. "The locals knew," Chen continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "That old man who talked about the place where time sleeps. This isn't a cave. It's a structure, maybe even a living structure, and we triggered something when we entered. That's why our watches stopped at 9:03. That's when we crossed some kind of threshold. So how do we cross back?" Private Sullivan asked, trying to keep the panic from his voice. No one had an answer. They continued forward, because going back was no longer an option. The passage behind them had subtly changed whenever they looked away, shifting in ways that suggested the tunnel was reconfiguring itself around them. After what felt like hours but was only another 20 minutes by their watches, the passage finally opened into a chamber unlike any they had seen before. This one was enormous, easily 200 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that seemed to contain a night sky, stars and constellations that were almost but not quite familiar. In the center of the chamber stood the ring they had seen before, or another one identical to it. But this time it was active, rotating slowly, the surface within it showing not reflections or other chambers but something that looked like a tunnel of light, stretching away to infinity. Around the ring stood figures. At first, the soldiers thought they were statues, but as they approached cautiously, they realized these were the beings from the containers, 17 of them, unwrapped now, standing in a circle around the ring. They were perhaps 8 feet tall, their skin a pale gray blue that seemed to luminesce faintly. Their heads were elongated, eyes large and dark as deep water. They wore simple garments that might have been white once but had yellowed with age. The beings didn't move. They might have been dead, standing corpses arranged in some ritual formation. But Private Fletcher, whose hand still bore the luminescent mark, could feel something from them. Not thought exactly, but intention, purpose, a kind of residual will. "They're waiting," Fletcher said, surprised by his own certainty. Or they were waiting for someone to activate the ring. Lieutenant Holloway circled the ring carefully, maintaining distance from both it and the standing figures. "This is the way out," he declared. "It has to be. This ring is some kind of transport device, and these beings, they built it." "Transport to where?" Sergeant Reeves demanded. "Sir, with respect, we don't know where that goes. It could be anywhere. It could be nowhere. Then we find another way." But even as Holloway said it, he knew there wasn't one. The chamber had only one entrance, the tunnel they had come through, and when Corporal Winston tried to backtrack, he found the passage had sealed itself, the wall now solid and unbroken. They were trapped in the chamber with the ring and the silent watchers. Private Morrison began to hyperventilate. Private Garcia started praying quietly in Spanish. Several men checked their weapons compulsively, though bullets would do nothing against walls that moved and beings that might not be alive. "Everyone stay calm," Reeves ordered, his voice steady despite his own fear. "We assess the situation. We're soldiers. We don't panic." Private Chen approached one of the standing figures carefully. Up close he could see details. The being's skin had a texture like leather that had been tanned for centuries. The eyes, though open, were clouded white. The hands, with their extra joints and elongated fingers, were positioned in a specific gesture, all 17 beings holding their hands in exactly the same way. "They're pointing," Chen realized. "Look, their fingers. They're all pointing at the ring." It was true. Despite their hands being held at different heights and angles, all the beings' fingers, if extended, would point directly at the center of the ring. Lieutenant Holloway made his decision. We go through. It's the only option that makes sense. These beings built this place, built the ring. It's meant to be used for travel. We go through and hopefully, we come out somewhere we can find our way back to our lines. And if we come out somewhere we can't get back from? Private Sullivan asked. Then we deal with that when it happens. But staying here isn't an option. Eventually our air will run out or the tunnel will reconfigure again and crush us. Or something worse will happen. Sergeant Reeves wanted to argue, wanted to find another solution, but he couldn't. The lieutenant was right. They had to move forward. How do we activate it? Private Fletcher stepped forward, his marked hand extended. I think I have to. When I touched my reflection through the ring before, that's what started all this. Maybe that's what these beings did. Touched the ring and got caught here somehow. Maybe we're supposed to finish what they started. Fletcher, no, Holloway began. But the young private had already moved forward. His glowing hand touched the surface of the ring, and the effect was immediate. The ring's rotation accelerated. The tunnel of light within it grew brighter, more defined. The 17 standing beings seemed to shift slightly, though that might have been shadows playing tricks in the changing light. And then the surface of the ring became transparent, showing not the infinite tunnel, but a clear image of the world beyond. They could see daylight. They could see the jungle, the limestone hillside, the entrance to the cave. They could see Corporal Peters at the radio, his back to them. They could see the rest of their unit moving around the camp. It's the entrance, Private Morrison said with relief. We can get out, we can go home. The men surged forward, desperate to escape the underground labyrinth, but Sergeant Reeves held up his hand. Wait, look at Peters. Look at his uniform. They looked more carefully. Corporal Peters was there, but his uniform was different. More modern somehow, though it was hard to say exactly how. The radio equipment was wrong too, more compact than the field radios they were familiar with. And there, on a wooden crate in the background, someone had placed a calendar. Private Chen, who had the best eyesight, squinted at it. August, I can't make out the day, but the year is... His voice failed. Lieutenant Holloway saw it too. 1987. The calendar says 1987. For a long moment no one spoke. The impossible number hung in the air between them. 44 years. The ring was showing them the cave entrance, but 44 years in the future. It's a trick, Corporal Mackenzie said. It has to be. Some kind of illusion. But even as he said it, they could see more details that confirmed the date. A helicopter flew overhead, visible through the jungle canopy, a model that didn't exist in 1943. A soldier walked past wearing fatigues and a camouflage pattern they didn't recognize. There was a jeep parked nearby that looked like no military vehicle they had ever seen. We can't go through, Private Garcia said. If we go through there, we'll be in 1987. Our families, everyone we know, they'll be old or dead. The war will be over. Everything will be different. We don't know that's what will happen, Holloway argued. This might just be showing us a possible future, or another place that looks similar. We won't know until we go through. And if we don't go through? Reeves asked. We stay here and die in this chamber? Or we wander these tunnels until they decide to let us out if they ever do? The choice was impossible. Go forward into an unknown future, or remain trapped in a place that defied natural law. The 17 standing beings seemed to watch them with their clouded eyes, waiting to see what choice the humans would make, just as they had apparently faced a similar choice centuries or millennia ago. Private Fletcher, whose hand was still connected to the ring, felt something, a pull, a calling, as if the ring wanted them to step through, as if whatever intelligence or force operated this place was guiding them toward a specific destination. I can feel it, Fletcher said. The ring, it's not just showing us 1987. It's pulling us there. I don't think we have a choice anymore. I think when I touched it, I committed us to this path. As if responding to his words, the ring began to pulse with light. The image of 1987 grew more solid, more real, until it seemed they could simply step through and be there. The standing beings began to glow as well, their ancient forms illuminating from within, 17 pillars of pale blue light. Together, Lieutenant Holloway ordered. We stay together. Link arms. If we're going into the future, we're going as a unit. The 17 soldiers formed a line, each man gripping the arms of the men beside him. Sergeant Reeves took his position at one end, Lieutenant Holloway at the other. Private Fletcher, with his glowing hand, stood in the center. On three, Holloway said. 1, 2, 3. As one, the 17 men stepped forward into the ring. The light engulfed them. They felt that sensation of movement without motion again, but stronger this time, as if they were being pulled apart and reassembled simultaneously. Time stretched and compressed. They experienced a moment that lasted both an instant and an eternity, and then they were through. The first thing Sergeant Daniel Reeves noticed was the heat. It was the same humid, oppressive heat of the Philippine jungle, but somehow it felt different, heavier, more intense. The second thing he noticed was the sound of shouting, boots pounding on hard ground and the metallic click of weapons being readied. They had emerged from the cave entrance, just as the ring had shown them, but instead of stepping out into a quiet morning in 1943, they found themselves surrounded by soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms, pointing automatic weapons that looked nothing like the rifles the 17 men carried. "Don't move. Keep your hands where we can see them." The commands came in English, but with accents that suggested these soldiers came from all over. American, Filipino, maybe others. A man who appeared to be in charge, wearing insignia that Reeves didn't recognize, stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" the commander demanded. "How did you get in there? That cave has been sealed for 2 days. Lieutenant Holloway, still trying to process their situation, managed to respond. "Lieutenant Marcus Holloway, 32nd Infantry Division, United States Army. Serial number 0534728. We entered this cave system on a reconnaissance mission on August 12, 1943, at approximately 0900 hours. The modern soldiers exchanged glances. Some lowered their weapons slightly, confusion replacing readiness. The commander spoke into a radio device attached to his shoulder, technology that seemed like science fiction to the displaced men. "Colonel Mendoza, this is Captain Torres. You need to get up here immediately. We have a situation." Within minutes, more personnel arrived. Soldiers, officers, and civilians in clothing that the 17 men found bizarre, too casual, too brightly colored for a military operation. A woman arrived which shocked some of the 1943 soldiers into silence. She wore the uniform of a military officer and carried herself with authority. "I'm Colonel Sarah Mendoza, United States Army," she introduced herself, studying the 17 men with a mixture of skepticism and growing astonishment. "Captain Torres says you claim to have entered this cave in 1943. That would be 44 years ago." "Ma'am," Sergeant Reeves spoke up, his old-fashioned manner of address causing several modern soldiers to smile despite the tension. "I know how this sounds, but it's the truth. By our watches, by our reckoning, we entered that cave less than 2 hours ago." Colonel Mendoza looked at their uniforms. Authentic 1943 issue, down to the last detail, showing wear consistent with field deployment, but none of the deterioration that 44 years would cause. She looked at their weapons, M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, equipment that belonged in a museum. She looked at their faces, young faces, most in their 20s, untouched by the decades they claimed to have skipped. "Captain Torres, clear the area, except for essential personnel. Get these men water and have medical standing by." She turned back to Holloway. "Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you some questions. The answers will determine whether you're telling the truth or part of some elaborate hoax." The interrogation that followed was thorough and increasingly surreal for both parties. Lieutenant Holloway described their mission in detail, the intelligence about Japanese ammunition, the cave system, the strange symbols, the ring. He provided his serial number, his unit designation, the names of his commanding officers, and details about the 32nd Infantry Division's deployment that could be verified against historical records. Colonel Mendoza had those records pulled up on a portable computer, another piece of technology that seemed like magic to the displaced soldiers. Every detail Holloway provided checked out. The 32nd Infantry Division had been in the Philippines in August 1943. A reconnaissance unit of 17 men under Lieutenant Marcus Holloway had been dispatched to investigate a cave near San Rafael, and on August 12, 1943, all 17 men had been reported missing. According to military records, Mendoza read from the screen, an extensive search was conducted for 3 weeks. No trace was found. The cave system was partially destroyed by Japanese forces during a retreat in September 1943. The 17 men were declared killed in action in November 1943. There's even a memorial. She looked up at them. "There's a memorial to your unit in Arlington National Cemetery." Private Tommy Chen, who had been silent since their emergence, finally spoke. Our families. What happened to our families? Colonel Mendoza's expression softened. Most of your next of kin were notified of your deaths in 1943. I'm sorry. Most of them have since passed away themselves. You need to understand. It's 1987. Ronald Reagan is president. The Vietnam War happened and ended. The world has changed. The weight of that statement settled over the 17 men like a physical force. Private Morrison began to cry quietly. Private Sullivan stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Sergeant Reeves felt the decades pressing down on him, felt the weight of a future he had never expected to see. But Lieutenant Holloway's mind was working differently. Colonel, you said the cave was sealed. Who sealed it? And why were you here with an armed detail? Mendoza hesitated, then made a decision. 2 weeks ago, we detected unusual readings from this site. Electromagnetic anomalies, gravitational distortions, phenomena that our scientists couldn't explain. 3 days ago, a research team entered the cave to investigate. They found the same things you described. The symbols, the chambers, evidence of technology that shouldn't exist. One of them touched something, and the readings went off the scale. We sealed the cave and were about to send in a specialized team when you emerged. The ring, Private Fletcher said, looking at his hand. The luminescent mark was fading, but still visible. We went through the ring. It's still active in there. Mendoza called over a civilian, a man in his 50s wearing glasses and carrying a tablet computer. Dr. Ramirez is a physicist specializing in temporal anomalies. He's been studying the readings from the cave. Dr. Ramirez looked at the 17 soldiers with the excitement of a scientist confronted with the impossible made real. Gentlemen, you may have just provided proof of a theory that's been purely speculative until now. That cave, that structure, because it's definitely not natural, appears to contain a form of closed, time-like curve, a bubble in space-time where the normal flow of time is disrupted. English, Doctor, Colonel Mendoza requested. They entered the cave in 1943 and exited in 1987, but experienced only about 2 hours of subjective time. The structure somehow created a shortcut through time, or possibly held them in a kind of temporal suspension. The ring you described, that's probably the mechanism, some kind of technology far beyond our current capabilities. So we really did skip 44 years, Corporal Mackenzie said flatly. Just skip them, while the rest of the world lived through them. It appears so, Dr. Ramirez confirmed. You're technically still the age you were in 1943, biologically speaking. Your bodies didn't experience those 44 years. The implications were staggering. The men stood in silence, trying to absorb what they had been told. Then Private Chen asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Can we go back? Dr. Ramirez and Colonel Mendoza exchanged glances. We don't know, Mendoza admitted. The structure in that cave is active and possibly dangerous. We were planning to send in a team with specialized equipment to study it further, but after what you've told us, I'm not sure I want to risk more lives. With respect, ma'am, Sergeant Reeves spoke up. It's not just about the risk. We saw things in there. Those beings, the ones standing around the ring, they might be some kind of warning, or they might be casualties of whoever built that place. Someone needs to understand what that structure is and what it does. Otherwise, more people could disappear like we did. Over the following hours, as the Philippine sun climbed toward noon, the 17 displaced soldiers were processed, documented, and debriefed. Medical examinations confirmed they were in perfect health, with biological markers consistent with men in their 20s and 30s from the 1940s. Their blood work showed levels of lead and other environmental contaminants typical of that era, but absent in modern populations. Their dental work was period accurate. Every test confirmed their impossible story. News of their emergence spread quickly through official channels, though Colonel Mendoza managed to keep it from the press, for now. By evening, representatives from various government agencies had arrived, including historians, military analysts, and intelligence officers who wanted to verify every detail of the men's story. The 17 soldiers were housed in a temporary barracks near the cave site, and there, in the quiet hours of that first night, they tried to come to terms with their situation. Private Morrison found a newspaper someone had left behind and spent an hour just reading it, trying to understand a world that had moved on without them. The Soviet Union, he learned, was apparently on the verge of collapse. Something called AIDS was killing people. Computers had become common, small enough to fit on a desk. Private Chen discovered that the war they had been fighting had ended in 1945 with the use of atomic weapons, bombs so powerful they had destroyed entire cities. He tried to explain the concept to the others, but it seemed too fantastic to believe, like something from a pulp science fiction magazine. Corporal Mackenzie learned that his father, a coal miner like himself, had died in a mine collapse in 1956. His mother had passed in 1973. He had no siblings, no close family left. The farm in West Virginia where he'd grown up had been sold decades ago. Private Sullivan discovered he'd had a son. His girlfriend had been pregnant when he shipped out, something he'd never known. The boy had grown up, lived a full life, and died in a car accident in 1982. Sullivan had a grandson and great-granddaughter somewhere in Florida, people who had grown up hearing stories about a grandfather who died in the war and never came home. Lieutenant Holloway sat apart from the others, his father's silver watch in his hand. The watch that had stopped at 9:03 in the tunnel was running again, keeping perfect time in 1987. His father had died in 1962, his mother in 1979. The world he had known was gone, replaced by something that looked similar but felt alien in countless small ways. Only Sergeant Reeves seemed to find a strange kind of acceptance. He had been 32 in 1943, old for a frontline soldier. Now he was still 32, but the calendar said he should be 76. He had been granted extra years by whatever force operated that cave, but at the cost of everything he had known. "What do we do now?" Private Garcia asked the group as they sat in the barracks. "Do we try to go back? Do we stay here? Can we even go back?" Private Anderson wondered. Dr. Ramirez didn't seem certain the ring would work that way. Lieutenant Holloway stood up, his officer's bearing reasserting itself despite the impossible circumstances. "Tomorrow I'm going to volunteer to go back into the cave with the research team. We need to understand what that structure is and how it works. Maybe there's a way to control it, to navigate it. Maybe we can go back to 1943, or maybe we can at least ensure no one else gets caught in it like we did." "I'm going with you," Sergeant Reeves said immediately. Several other men nodded in agreement, but Private Fletcher looked at his fading handprint and shook his head. "I can't. When I touched that ring, I felt something. It knew me, recognized me somehow. I think if I go back in there, it'll pull me in again. Maybe pull all of us in. Then you stay here," Holloway decided. "Anyone who wants to stay, that's fine. No one should feel obligated to go back into that place." In the end, 12 of the 17 men volunteered to accompany the research team. The 5 who chose to stay, Fletcher, Morrison, Garcia, Anderson, and Kowalski, did so for various reasons. Fletcher because of his connection to the ring, Morrison because he couldn't face the darkness again, Garcia because his deep Catholic faith told him they had been given a second chance at life and shouldn't risk it. Anderson and Kowalski simply because they were done with military life, even if it meant adapting to a world 4 decades ahead of the one they knew. The next morning, the research team assembled. Dr. Ramirez had brought in specialists, engineers, physicists, archaeologists, and even a linguist who hoped to decipher the symbols that covered the cave walls. They had equipment that seemed magical to the 1943 soldiers: portable computers, advanced lighting systems, sensors that could detect electromagnetic fields and radiation. Colonel Mendoza addressed the combined group. "Our objectives are threefold. First, document and study the structure. Second, determine if it poses any ongoing threat. Third, see if we can understand enough about it to control its functions. Everyone maintains radio contact at all times. No one touches anything without explicit clearance. Is that understood?" The group entered the cave at 800 hours on August 14, 1987. Lieutenant Holloway led the 12 soldiers from his unit, while Dr. Ramirez supervised the civilian specialists. They were equipped with modern flashlights that put their old 1943 models to shame, casting powerful LED beams that eliminated the shadows. The tunnel looked the same, yet different. The walls were the same limestone, but now they could see details they had missed before. Tiny symbols etched between the larger ones, patterns that suggested writing or mathematical formulas. The research team stopped frequently to document everything, taking photographs and measurements. When they reached the main chamber, Sergeant Reeves pointed out where they had first noticed the strange symbols. Dr. Ramirez had one of his specialists, a woman named Dr. Lin, examine them closely. She had a device that could create 3D scans of the carvings, capturing every detail. "These aren't random," Dr. Lin announced after several minutes of study. "They're repeated in sequences. Look, this pattern here appears every 17 iterations, and these smaller symbols between the main ones, they're almost like punctuation, dividing the sequences into sentences or equations." 17, Private Chen noted. Like there were 17 of us. Like there were 17 of those beings we saw. The number might be significant to whoever built this place, Dr. Ramirez suggested. Many ancient cultures had sacred numbers, though this is far more sophisticated than anything from Earth's ancient civilizations. They proceeded deeper, following the route that Lieutenant Holloway's group had taken to the lower chamber. The passage was exactly as they remembered, spiraling down in that gradual corkscrew. The humming was present but quieter, as if the structure was in a dormant state. The lower chamber came into view and the research team stopped in collective awe. The ring stood there, just as the soldiers had described, but now it was inert. No rotation, no light within its circle, just a band of unknown metal suspended impossibly in the air. Dr. Ramirez approached it carefully, his instruments held out before him. The readings are incredible. This object is generating a localized distortion in space-time. Not active at the moment, but the potential is there, like a generator that's idling. The 17 beings still stood in their circle around the ring. The research team examined them, with a mixture of scientific curiosity and unease. Dr. Chen, an anthropologist in the group, noted details. Humanoid, but definitely not human. The bone structure is all wrong. These hands. Look at the joints. They're designed for fine manipulation, possibly for working with extremely delicate mechanisms. And the heads. The brain case is enlarged, suggesting high intelligence. Are they dead or in some kind of stasis? Colonel Mendoza asked. I'm reading minimal electromagnetic activity from them, one of the technicians reported. It's faint, but it's there. They might be in some kind of suspended state like the soldiers were in the tunnel. Lieutenant Holloway walked around the ring, studying it from all angles. In our time, when Private Fletcher touched it, it activated, showed us 1987 and pulled us through. Can we activate it again? Dr. Ramirez hesitated. Possibly. But without understanding how it works, we could end up anywhere or anywhen. It might not be controllable. Or it might be. Sergeant Reeves countered. Those beings arranged themselves around it in a specific pattern. The symbols we've been seeing, they might be instructions or warnings. If we can decipher them, we might be able to control where and when the ring takes us. Dr. Lin had been working on the symbols, feeding her scans into a portable computer that ran translation programs. I think I'm getting something. The language structure is mathematical at its core. These symbols represent concepts expressed as numerical relationships. This sequence here, repeated throughout the cave, translates roughly to intersection of paths or meeting of timelines. A time ship, Dr. Ramirez breathed. This isn't just a cave system or a shelter. It's a vessel, a ship designed to navigate through time itself. And these beings, they were the crew. The implications were staggering. They weren't just dealing with some natural phenomenon or even a human-made structure. They were standing inside alien technology, possibly the wreckage of a ship that had crashed or been abandoned in the distant past. Private Chen asked the crucial question. If it's a ship, can we pilot it? Can we make it take us back to 1943? Dr. Lin worked frantically at her computer, correlating symbol patterns with her emerging translation matrix. The symbols near the ring, I think they're destination settings, like coordinates, but not spatial coordinates, temporal ones. If I'm reading this correctly, this sequence represents August 12, 1943, the day we entered, Lieutenant Holloway confirmed. It's set to take us back to the exact moment we left. Not exactly, Dr. Lin corrected, studying the symbols more closely. It's set to August 12, 1943 at 9:03 a.m., the moment your watches stopped. That might be when you fully entered the ship's temporal field. Sergeant Reeves understood. So if we go through the ring now, we'd arrive back at 9:03 on August 12, 1943. We'd have a chance to stop ourselves from entering the tunnel in the first place. But Dr. Ramirez looked troubled. The temporal mechanics are more complex than that. If you go back and prevent your past selves from entering, you create a paradox. You would only be able to go back because you did enter the tunnel, but if you prevent that from happening, then you never would have entered in the first place. So we can't change what happened, Private Sullivan said. Even if we go back, we can't save our past selves. Actually, Dr. Lin interjected, there might be a way. These symbols here suggest the concept of branching paths or split streams. The ship might create a divergent timeline when you travel through it. You could go back to 1943, but it would be a different 1943, a parallel version where your past selves don't exist yet. The philosophical and scientific implications made everyone's head hurt, but the practical question remained. Should they try to go back? Colonel Mendoza spoke with authority. This is a decision each of you has to make individually. You've lost everything you knew, your time, your families, your place in the world. If there's a chance, even a theoretical one, to go back and reclaim your lives, I understand wanting to take it. But there are risks. The ship might not work as we think. You could end up somewhere, someone else entirely. Or the paradox Dr. Ramirez mentioned could cause something catastrophic. Lieutenant Holloway looked at his men. 12 had come into the cave with him. Chen, Sullivan, Mackenzie, Donovan, Hayes, Fletcher, Winston, Baker, Taylor, Jefferson, Reeves, and himself. They had faced death together many times in combat. Now they faced a choice that was perhaps more difficult than any battlefield decision. I vote we go back, Corporal Mackenzie said simply. I don't belong in 1987. My whole life, everyone I knew, it's all in 1943. If there's even a chance to return to that, I have to take it. Others nodded in agreement, but Private Chen shook his head. We'd be going back to the middle of a war, to a world where we'd have to fight and possibly die. Here, now, the war is over. We have a chance to live in peace, even if everything is different. Peace in a world we don't understand, Corporal Winston countered. Where everyone we knew is gone, where we have no place, no purpose. The debate continued for over an hour. The research team stayed back, respecting the impossible choice the soldiers faced. In the end, the group was split. 7 men wanted to attempt the return to 1943. Holloway, Reeves, Mackenzie, Sullivan, Winston, Taylor, and Baker. 5 wanted to stay in 1987. Chen, Donovan, Hayes, Jefferson, and Corporal Fletcher, who had remained outside the cave but had sent word through Colonel Mendoza that he wouldn't risk activating the ring again. Dr. Lin worked with her translation matrix to try to set the ring for August 12, 1943. The process involved touching specific symbols in a particular sequence, 17 symbols, arranged in a pattern that matched the positions of the 17 standing beings around the ring. I think I have it, Dr. Lin announced, but I can't be certain. The margin for error is significant. Understood, Lieutenant Holloway said. He turned to the 5 men who had chosen to stay. Chen, Donovan, Hayes, Jefferson, it's been an honor serving with you. Live well in this new world. Private Chen saluted, and the others followed suit. Thank you, sir, for everything. The 7 men who were attempting the return gathered near the ring. Dr. Ramirez had positioned sensors around the chamber to record whatever happened. When you activate the sequence, the ring should begin to rotate and the portal should open. Step through together, quickly. The window may only be open for a few seconds. Lieutenant Holloway nodded. He stepped forward to the first symbol in the sequence and touched it. The symbol glowed with that now familiar blue-green light. He moved to the second, then the third. With each touch, the hum in the chamber grew stronger. By the time he touched the 17th symbol, the ring was spinning rapidly. Light bloomed within it, and through the light, they could see jungle, morning sunlight, and, impossibly, themselves, their past selves, standing at the cave entrance on the morning of August 12, 1943, preparing to enter. It's working, Dr. Ramirez shouted over the increasing noise. The temporal coordinates are locked. You have about 10 seconds. The 7 men didn't hesitate. Holloway went first, stepping through the ring. Reeves followed, then Mackenzie, Sullivan, Winston, Taylor, and finally Baker. As Baker's foot left the chamber floor of 1987, the ring's rotation reached a crescendo. The light flashed blindingly bright, and then silence. The ring stopped spinning. The light faded. The chamber in 1987 was empty except for the research team, the remaining soldiers from 1943, and the 17 standing beings who had waited there for uncounted centuries. Did it work? Private Chen asked quietly. Dr. Ramirez studied his instruments. The temporal distortion spiked and then collapsed. The energy signature suggests successful transit to the specified coordinates, but he paused, troubled. There's an anomaly. The readings show 2 distinct destination points, not one. What does that mean? Colonel Mendoza demanded. I think it means Dr. Lin was right about the branching paths. The 7 men went through to 1943, but not to our 1943, not to the timeline we're in. They went to a parallel version, a split reality. In that timeline, they'll arrive and, well, we can't know what happens there. It's separate from our continuum now. Private Donovan looked at the now inert ring. So they're gone. Really gone. Not just in time, but in reality itself. They made their choice, Sergeant Chen said quietly, and we made ours. The research team began packing up their equipment. They had documented everything, learned more in a few hours than decades of theoretical physics had taught them. The structure, the time ship, would be studied further, carefully with every precaution, but for now, it had done what it was designed to do. It had allowed travelers to choose their own path through time. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Private Hayes noticed something. The 17 standing beings were no longer standing. They had collapsed, their ancient forms finally giving in to entropy. As the research team watched, the beings began to decompose rapidly, their tissues breaking down into a fine dust that glowed faintly before fading to nothing. They were waiting, Private Chen realized, waiting for someone to complete the journey they started. Now that it's done, they can finally rest. In the weeks and months that followed, the 5 remaining soldiers from 1943 began the difficult process of integrating into 1987. The government provided them with new identities, documentation, and financial support. They were debriefed extensively, their knowledge of the 1940s proving valuable to historians and military analysts. Private Chen eventually went to college, using his military benefits to study anthropology and archaeology. He would go on to become a leading expert on temporal anomalies and ancient technologies, consulted by governments and universities around the world. Private Donovan found work as a mechanic, his mechanical skills from 1943 translating surprisingly well to modern vehicles once he learned the new systems. He married in 1989 and had 3 children, building the family life that he had lost when he entered the cave. Private Hayes struggled more with the adjustment. The world of 1987 seemed too loud, too fast, too different, but he found solace in veterans groups, connecting with others who had experienced the dislocation of war, even if none had traveled through time to experience it. Private Jefferson became a writer, documenting his experiences in a book that became a bestseller despite, or because of, its unbelievable premise. Most readers thought it was brilliant science fiction. Only a few knew it was true. Private Fletcher, who had remained outside the cave during the final expedition, became Dr. Ramirez's assistant, helping to study the time ship from a safe distance. The mark on his hand never fully faded, a reminder of his brief connection to technology beyond human understanding. As for the 7 who had gone back through the ring, Holloway, Reeves, Mackenzie, Sullivan, Winston, Taylor, and Baker, their fate remained unknown in the 1987 timeline. The research team could only theorize about what had happened to them. Had they successfully prevented their past selves from entering the cave? Had they lived out the rest of their lives in an alternate 1943, fighting in a war that was, for them, both past and present? Or had something gone wrong, stranding them in yet another time, another reality? Dr. Lin continued to study the symbols, making breakthroughs in understanding the mathematical language of whoever had built the time ship. She discovered that the structure wasn't just a random cave system where the ship had crashed. The cave was the ship, grown or constructed around the ring mechanism, designed to integrate with the limestone geology of the Philippines. It had been there for thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands, waiting. The question of who built it, where they came from, and why they came to Earth remained unanswered. The 17 beings had taken their secrets with them into dust, but their technology remained, studied and protected by the U.S. military and a consortium of international scientists. 5 years after the emergence of the 17 soldiers in 1992, Dr. Lin made a breakthrough. She successfully translated a large portion of the symbols and discovered something remarkable. The time ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a beacon. It had been placed at that specific location at that specific point in Earth's geological history to create a stable temporal anchor, a fixed point that other timeship crews could navigate to. The implications were profound. If there was one timeship on Earth, there might be others. If the 17 beings had needed a beacon to navigate to Earth, they must have been part of a larger civilization, a network of temporal travelers exploring time itself. In 2003, a second structure was discovered in Antarctica, buried under ancient ice. It showed the same symbol patterns, the same mathematical language. In 2011, a third was found in the Amazon rainforest. Each one told a piece of a larger story about travelers who moved through time as easily as humans moved through space. And in each location, there were always 17 standing figures, waiting in eternal vigil. As for the 5 soldiers from 1943 who chose to stay in the future they had never expected to see, they lived their lives as fully as they could. They became part of history twice over, first as casualties of a war that had ended long before they finally came home, and second as proof that time was more flexible, more strange than anyone had imagined. Private Chen, in his old age, would sometimes stand at the sealed entrance to the cave where it had all begun. The military had filled it with concrete in 1995, deeming it too dangerous to leave accessible, but Chen could still feel it there, beneath the stone and the sealant, the ring waiting patiently in its chamber, waiting for the next travelers who would need to make an impossible choice between the past they knew and the future they couldn't imagine. And on quiet nights when the wind blew just right through the Philippine jungle, he thought he could hear it, the hum of the timeship, the echo of 17 soldiers stepping into darkness on an August morning in 1943, and the whisper of countless timelines branching and merging in the infinite spaces between seconds. The 17 soldiers had entered a tunnel claiming only minutes had passed, but they had traveled 44 years into the future. Some had stayed in that future. Some had returned to the past or to a version of it, but all of them had learned the truth that the ancient builders of the timeship had known, that time was not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean with countless currents, and those brave enough or foolish enough to dive into its depths might surface in places and times they never expected, but where they were always meant to be.